Welcome to Soul Elevation, guiding your ascension to new heights. I'm your host, Kara Goodwin, and this is my favorite type of episode, where we dive into the mysterious happenings people have reported over time, from UFOs to past life memories to near-death experiences and deathbed visions. So if you love to explore phenomena that indicates there's more to life than what's on the surface, you're going to love this one. Simon Bowen is the host of two influential podcasts, the Alien UFO podcast and Our Paranormal Afterlife, as well as a clinical hypnotherapist and an author specializing in topics related to consciousness, reincarnation, and the afterlife. His research is informed by personal experiences with paranormal phenomenon, including psychic flashes, UFO sightings, and other unexplained occurrences. These experiences have contributed to his academic interest in the nature of consciousness and its potential existence beyond the physical body. His latest book is called Verified Near-Death Experiences. And I was a guest on Simon's podcast recently, where we talked about my new book, Your Authentic Awakening. You can get this book everywhere, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, etc. And you can get a signed copy with free shipping if you're in the US by going to karagoodwin.com/book. This book will nurture your spiritual growth, whether you're just starting to explore your spiritual nature or you're further along on your journey. I have practical exercises to help you deepen your spiritual connection, and I also share my more unusual quantum experiences in consciousness. Check it out at karagoodwin.com/book. And now enjoy this episode. Well, welcome, Simon. I'm so excited to have you here today. Thanks so much for coming on.
It's great to talk to you again. You've been a guest on my podcast, and it's great to be the guest on your podcast. Like this time, I'm the victim.
Yes, right. Well, I had a wonderful time on your podcast, and we both have books out right now. And so I have read your near-death experience book, and it's wonderful. I love exploring near-death experiences. I feel like they're this wonderful way for a multitude of backgrounds to be able to kind of spark something within them, because they don't have there's not dogma attached to them. It's pure experience. But before we get to that, tell us what sparked your interest in aliens and the paranormal.
I don't know, really. I've always been interested. When I was 10 years old, I'd go to the local public library and get out books on Bigfoot and UFOs and ghosts and all sorts of things. And then as I got older, my interests kind of just came down to the afterlife and UFOs. And I read Raymond Moody's book, Life After Life, which I think was 1976. And I read that in the early 80s, and I read other books as well. And I would go to the College of Psychic Studies in London, and I wasn't a student there, but people could go there and they'd be trained in mediumship and channeling and psychic stuff and past life regression, and you could go there and pay a little bit of money and the students could practice on you. So I'd go every 2 weeks and see somebody there, and it was like an investigation because I was so fascinated. And I was taken through my first past life regression in 1987, and
Wow.
yeah, so over time, just reading more and more books, and as this more and more came out about near-death experiences, it becomes a much more powerful sort of phenomena that really, for me, shows that consciousness continues. And so when I started my podcast, that was one of the main things I wanted to cover. And so I've interviewed loads of people who've had near-death experiences and researchers, and that's where I found the people for my book. Most of them, I've talked to them myself.
That's fantastic. Now, talking about the UFO phenomenon in the 80s and the 90s, you're in a hub of crop circle activity because you're in southern England. And so that tends to be where there's a huge concentration, and there has been for decades, of the crop circle phenomenon. Have you been drawn into any of the crop circles? Do they play a role at all?
No. I was keeping my eye out to try and find to see because I think there's a website, it might be called Crop Circle Connector or something, and as soon as they hear about one, it's on there, and because they could be close, I used to watch that to see if one showed up, but it never did.
They're
So
not close
I would
enough.
love to go and visit one.
Yeah. Do you feel that you've had like ET encounters or have you seen UFOs?
Yeah, I'd seen UFOs a couple of times. I saw one very close up when what happened was I'd just done a gig with my band on a Sunday night in a town called High Wycombe, and we packed up, and then it was like 1 a.m. on Monday morning. I'm heading on the M40 back into London, and I know that stretched the motorway really well, and I know there's nothing in this field onto the left, but I could see a really bright light there. And I thought this was odd. I thought maybe they're doing emergency gas repairs or something with electricity cables or something. And so I slowed down, and there were no other cars on the motorway, which was a bit weird.
Yeah, that's a
And
sign.
yeah, there was something up here. I think it was like there were some trees, and I could see the light. And so I slowed down, and just as I came past the trees, there was this craft just sitting there. And I was doing 5 miles an hour, and I was looking at it through the windscreen and then leaning forward and looking up at it. And it was about the size of a large house, completely silent, didn't move an inch
And
the
it
whole
was
time.
hovering.
Yeah, and it was about 25 feet off the ground, maybe 200 feet from me. And there was loads and loads of pin spot red lights across one half of the bottom of it. And from the other end, there was a really powerful spotlight pointed at the ground. And yeah, so you kind of think, well, it's not a helicopter, it's not an aircraft, it couldn't be a hot air balloon, because I was that close, I could get a really good look at it. And then as it got out of sight behind me, I just increased my speed and went home. So, which seemed a bit weird because I had
Wow.
such an interest in UFOs. I wonder if I should have
Yes.
stopped.
Well, in exploring like ET encounters and what people pick up through hypnosis, some people find that they have stories like that, but when they go under hypnosis, they actually went on the ship, but they didn't retain the memory. There was like a screen, or the memory was cut out for, because it would be too much. Have you explored doing, because you're a hypnotist, right?
Yeah. I mean, one thing
Have you
about it
explored
is
going under?
I have, but with that night, I knew enough to check the clock when I got home to see if there's any missing time, and there wasn't. I did have something crop up during a past life regression, and I'm not sure if I made it up. My subconscious made it up because I've read so many books about this phenomenon of the alien abduction. But I was taken through this past life, and I saw the death of that past life. And then I was kind of like a ball of light looking down on the body. And the hypnotherapist, who was trained by Dolores Cannon, she was just saying to me, okay, now just drift away, just get higher and higher, drift away from that life, and just tell me the next thing you see. And I went from like 0 to 100% terrified in an instant. And I saw myself lying on a table with these greys either side of me. And the hypnotherapist said afterwards, she said, I saw all your muscles quivering. You were so scared. And she said I didn't want to tell her what I was seeing. I thought, this is crazy. What's going on here? Because there was no attempt to find anything like that. This was a past life regression. It wasn't that we'd gone in looking for it. Because some people might say it was hypnotic suggestion. Your mind made it up because you were searching for it. But I was lying on this table, and they had this sort of thing on a crane. I don't know what it was, doing something to my stomach. And then suddenly it was like they put a vision in my mind where I was standing in this forest, and there was an area about the size of a football field that had been cleared. So there was all these fresh stumps and things. And there was a planet in the sky that was really close to us, far too close for reality, because the magnetic field and the gravitational field of the planets that close would be such a mess. But there was a pathway coming off that planet, and all these children in white were walking down the pathway. And where I was at the bottom of the pathway, all these adults and all these children were coming off the path, and there's all smiles and hugging. And I heard this phrase in my mind that said, when the planets meet, the children will return. And then I was back in the room, and I was standing up, and I had a grey either side of me, and they walked me over to the wall, and a hole opened up in the wall that was like cookie cutter shape of me that I could just perfectly go through. And it didn't go into a room or a corridor, it went into this massive energetic space that was full of colours all shimmering. And as soon as I went through, I was doing 100 miles an hour through this space, and there were other people in there. And I got into this small, long room. It's almost like a railway carriage, and it was completely white. And there was all these chairs down the sides that were kind of blended into the wall. They weren't separate from it. And there was clothes everywhere, like pajamas and things. And these two greys were there, and I got this kind of telepathic message. It said, no one goes home till you get dressed. And then I walked down to the end of the carriage where they were standing, and there was a hole in the floor. And I stepped into that hole and went through it. And then I was at home in my flat in London, 2 a.m. And I went to bed and then got up in the morning, went to work as usual. Like, completely forgot what happened, if it was real.
Wow. And so in that regression, that was in this lifetime.
Yeah. Yeah, because that I know that I was living in that flat in the 1990s. So, yeah.
Wow. That's fascinating. And you know, I've done QHHT as well. And I know exactly what you're talking about, where it's like, well, this is what came up. I don't know how much I made it up, you know, because the whole way to do it is like the first thing that comes to mind, the first thing that comes to mind. And sometimes there were things that I couldn't even explain, you know, and it was like, I don't even know how to explain. It was such a cacophony. And I didn't have any reference point for some of the things that I was seeing. You know, it was like, for example, you know, I was like, the best way I can describe it is, you know, the cymbals, the instrument, like that a marching band, somebody might crash two big cymbals together.
Yeah.
And it was kind of that shape where it's more or less flat, but it does come out a little bit in the middle. And they were like, whatever this was, it kind of came, it was spinning, and it was vertical, and it was joined. You know, it was like two cymbals joined up together spinning. And I'm like, I have no idea what I'm seeing, why I'm seeing this, if it's even like, if I'm really even seeing what I think what I'm trying to describe, or if it's just this mess in my mind that doesn't make any sense. And I'm like, I don't know what it's for. I don't know why I'm seeing this, you know? And I never did get any further clarification or context for it, you know, but so I appreciate what you're saying. But yours was much more logical than mine.
Yeah.
You had a story, and, you know, but it can be very dubious, at least my experience.
Yeah. And then with the UFOs and the abduction thing, it can be very strange. Some really weird things show up in it.
Yeah. Well, I want to talk about your book and near-death experiences. Now, have you experienced a near-death experience yourself?
No, I haven't. I've had these other experiences, but nothing like that. It's almost like I'm like we're all on a spiritual path, and every now and then something small comes along and gives you a hint. And it might be that's your next step on the path. And it might have been like seeing the UFO. I saw it because it wanted me to see it. And that was another step on the path. And then it seems like some people have a huge step on the path, like a near-death experience. But maybe I haven't had one because I don't need one.
Right. Yeah. I would think that that's right. Because they do seem to be these huge openings for people where it totally shifts their perspective of what's going on with reality. So tell us about your book.
Yeah, so it's right here. There's 30 near-death experiences, and every single one of them has an incident where the near-death experiencer saw something, and it's later verified, and the people can say to them, but you were dead when that happened. There's no way you could have seen that. and they see things that are in another part of the hospital, or not even in the hospital, or wherever they are. Because, some people have a car accident and they'll have their near-death experience. But that's the thing that I really like about doing my podcast, is finding these kind of verification events. And you can find it with children who remember their past lives and mediumship and all other areas. But what I did was, there's 24 in here of the people that I've interviewed, and I talked to them about everything that happened. And when I finished the chapters, I sent them the chapter so they could check it out, so we could be sure that what I've written is accurate. And then there's some other cases. There's 2 or 3 famous ones. I've got a small number from a long time ago, one from 1911 that happened in London. Oh my goodness. And that one, the way the guy describes it is exactly how near-death experiences are described today. So I'll tell you what happened with him. He was 16 years old and he was walking down the path in London, and a wall collapsed and fell on him, and that's how come he had this near-death experience. And his parents lived in a house in the country while he was living in London, and he was 16, and he worried about his mum because he thought, I'm dead now. And then instantly he's with his mum at their house, and she's sitting there knitting, and his father's reading the newspaper, and she suddenly goes, my boy's been hurt. And the father's, oh, don't be silly, it's nonsense. And she goes, no, we have to go to London. And he's saying, well, no, we know. And she insisted, so they got the train to London, and him, in spirit form, went with them, was on the train and heard their whole conversation. And so, to cut a long story short, when he was resuscitated and they got to him, he told them everything that he saw, and they said, yep, it's absolutely correct. That's what happened. That's the conversation we had. But there was something else that happened, that before they came to see him, he was still out of body, and he was in this house close to where he was, and a woman had just given birth, and the doctor was there, but the woman and the baby died. And he was there in spirit form, and he felt this massive pull to the child's body, almost like he could join with it and live that life. And he said it was a real compulsion, this real feeling. And he nearly did it, but then he thought of his mum again and thought, no, I've got to go back to my body. So when he got back to his body, he thought of that pull, and that's how he got back into his body, that feeling of getting close to it and moving into it.
Wow, that's remarkable. There's another, you talk about how, because your book is verified near-death experiences, so that's a big component of the book, where there's that critical element where there's something that a person in a traumatic situation where they've lost consciousness would not have access to the information that these people come back and say. One of the stories, for example, talks about somebody in a hospital who had a near-death experience, and he even heard a conversation that the nurse was having on the phone with her husband, I want to say, and then could even, was with the husband and was hearing, what the husband was saying and the circumstances that were surrounding it that had nothing to do with him. And they were able to verify, that he'd been on the other end of this conversation. So it's very much verifying that non-locality of consciousness, that, we're not, from a consciousness perspective, we're not bound by location of where the body is and the access to information that we have.
Yeah, and in that story, he saw the husband's socks, and they had little animal pictures on them.
Yes.
And he looked at them and thought, what kind of a man wears socks like these? And then when the doctor returned, he had those socks in his hand when he went back to visit Tibor. The Tibor Putnoki was the guy. And that's great, because there was also a nurse at a cabinet who dropped an item that went underneath the cabinet, and he was able to describe it and even got the serial number right. And the doctor went in the room and pulled it out from under the cabinet. And, he was receiving CPR at the time in a bed. How could he possibly know these things were going on? Wow. So there's, in every chapter, there's all sorts of verification events there.
Right. Yeah. And Has, with your research into NDEs, has it changed anything about what you think about death and consciousness? I mean, I know you've been researching consciousness basically, your whole life, but is there anything in that particular body of work that has changed your understanding of anything?
Yeah, I'd say, because the book's called Verified Near-Death Experiences, Proof of an Afterlife. And so these things, for me, has proven that there's an afterlife. And I have no fear of death. It's not like I want to die. But that's shown me also from my experiences of past life regression and taking people through past life regression, and also all these children with past life memories. That shows me reincarnation is a thing that's real. So it's also in near-death experiences when people have a life review that can be such an impact on them, and they have that thing where they see every moment of their life and they see how they interacted with people, and they see scenes when they were really mean to someone, or they would see when they were really nice to someone, but then they experience it from the other person's point of view. So when he was mean to them, he could see how bad they felt, and he would feel how bad they felt. And it was a kind of ripple effect that that person then would feel bad and be mean to somebody else. And the life review like that, I think, can be such a shock and so impactful. That might be one of the reasons why near-death experiences change so much when they come back. And it's almost like it's a real message for all of us. But another part of the life review is that when he was nice to someone, that was seen as something really great, because a lot of the time when people are going through their life review, they have a spirit guide with them, or some kind of spiritual being, or maybe a deceased loved one who are helping them through it. And when you do something nice for someone, they're like, yeah, excellent, well done. And you don't realize just how important it is. And some of them say even the slightest little thing that you might do for someone that's nice and generous has such a big impact, and that we just don't realize it. So that's been a real, I don't know, an education, a real eye-opener, that understanding how your behavior affects everyone around you.
Right. It is amazing just how connected we are. And when you're able to interact with it at a soul level, at that energetic level, that you really feel it in a much more profound way. What is your perception based on all of the research and the stories that you've immersed yourself in with near-death experiences and reincarnation, in terms of where we go after death, for lack of a better word? Like, do you see there being like one heaven for, in common terms, in common Western terms, that everybody goes to heaven? Or is it, there are people who talk about it's right here. It's right here with us. We're sharing the space with it, but we just can't see it. Tell me what your view is.
I wonder if the space that people go to when they have a near-death experience is maybe like a halfway house or something. And you might call it the theatre of the near-death experience, because everybody will have an experience which is tailored specifically for them, and it's perfectly tailored to them. So somebody might be in this incredible landscape with green fields and their pets are there and these incredible buildings, and then somebody else might be in a cityscape that's a wonderful city, and others might have a distressing experience. And so I think maybe there's specific locations that are built just for that. Lots of people describe certain places that like there's three in my book. These people talk about this enormous white building that's just incredible, and it's a place of knowledge and learning. And one of them said they saw people coming and going in all sorts of period costumes, like people from medieval or the 70s, and that you would go to the building and there'd be a flat wall, and it would open up and allow you in, and it would match your frequency with the room that you needed. And when you go inside, it's floor to ceiling shelves full of books and scrolls, and there's people around studying them, and it's almost like this is the heaven for people who love to study. and that there might be another place where it's people who love to go whitewater rafting or something. But then there's the books by Michael Newton, where he took people through past life regressions and went into the space between lives. And that space seems very different to these incredible landscapes, where you would meet with your soul group and your council of elders, and there's maybe a healing place. And so it's difficult to say, really. It's almost like there's a certain frequency to you, your consciousness, and you'll go to the place which matches your frequency. And that may be a lower frequency or a higher frequency, but there's always this thing that you will progress and move higher in frequency. And in my book, there's George Ritchie, who goes to this place that's like a city that he said it seems to be on 24-hour war production, making weapons and things. And there's loads of dead spirits there around the live people, and there's all this awful kind of behaviour going on with all these people. And then there's another place where it's a city that's so incredible, and when you're there it feels so amazing, and everybody's with you, and you feel like you know everybody there and they know you. So I wouldn't say there is one place. There seems to be all sorts of places, depending on you and your subconscious and your frequency.
Yeah, thank you for that. That is how I see it as well, where we have these resonant frequencies. We have these, we are vibration, we are energy vibration, and we just go where we match, which would be maybe where we're from. But there's a lineage or a teacher or something. They talk about a home frequency, where it's like you've got your sort of default frequency. And of course, as energy beings, we're taking in all kinds of energies all the time in this experience, where we're interacting with lower frequencies and higher frequencies because we're interacting with each other. We're exposed to all different kinds of invisible energies around us as we move through this life experience. But we have that resonance that's specific to us. And so there would be a multitude, like you're saying, of possibilities, and we would be drawn to what matches us, But it is, I wonder sometimes, like with the near-death experiences, like they're getting that glimpse of like what happens immediately after, you're talking about the life review and so forth. And then you have Michael Newton's work where it's more of like, okay, this isn't immediately after, this is like what the quote unquote lifestyle is when you're not on Earth, which is slightly different, right? It's more about like the ongoing. It'd be the difference between like enrollment day or at college, or move-in day at university, where it's like, okay, go find your room, go find your counselor, meet the people who live on your floor and see where your classes are and all of that kind of stuff, versus you're a few weeks in, what's going on, you're in the schedule, you're being tested, you're studying and all of that kind of thing. Just different experiences between those two periods of time, even though time wouldn't be a thing there, but
yeah. That's what makes it confusing, isn't it?
Yes, right. And this is a vast universe with endless possibilities as well. So it makes sense that people have all these different experiences. And like you, I have been interested in spirituality in stories like this. And then the weirder stories, as a child, I was very drawn to like aliens and Loch Ness and the pyramids and all of these things that it's like, wait, what? That's a thing? That's a thing on this planet? Like, that's so different from our regular reality. But the near-death experiences, I feel like there is this allure to them because we are all going to die, and that's a huge mystery. Nobody comes back and tells us, you can find it, mediums and so forth, but like in the everyday life, we don't have people who died and they're telling us like what to expect and, it's just this mystery. They're gone, and we're left thinking that they're gone, that they're truly gone. But you also talked about how the past life regressions that you've done have also built into your understanding of what's happening in the afterlife and reincarnation and so forth. Are there any surprising or particularly moving experiences that have come through the sessions that you facilitated with past life regression, or any hypnotic sessions?
Well, one thing I see often is people in tears, and it's not as though they're sobbing and crying. They may be talking normally, but there's tears are streaming. And I think that might be down to some kind of energy release or something happening. And it's a thing in our house. So I finish a session, I'll see my wife and go, I made somebody cry. And she's like, yeah, great, well done. But so sometimes things show up. There was a session I did, and towards the end of every session, we go into the space between lives. And this woman met with her spirit guide, who said, right, you've got to come with me. And so we followed the spirit guide. And he took her to a library, this massive library. And they got this big book out for her and put it in front of her. And they said, this is the book of your soul. And she was looking at the pages and she couldn't read what was written. I said, well, let's ask them, why are you showing us this book if you can't read it? And they said, this is just to show you that everything's in the book. Everything happens for a reason. So that was an interesting one. I had a guy who went to a life on another planet. That was very interesting. And for myself, I had a past life regression where I saw myself as a small girl in a park. And it was a very distinctive park because it was on such a steep slope. And it was 2 years later that I found that park, because it was so distinctive, so recognizable. And the houses around the park were exactly as I'd seen them in the past life regression. And then in that life, I grew up to be a nurse in the First World War. And I was in France, close to the front lines, and these men were coming in with terrible injuries. And that was, that was very hard to deal with that for a year or two. And then later, another past life regression, I returned to that life where I was about 30 years old, and I'm on this street in London, and there's a car next to me, and this man there that I believe is my husband. And we needed to get something done, and I'm saying, well, I can do it. And he's very patronizing and talking down to me, a kind of, oh, you're just a silly little woman, don't be ridiculous. And I felt really quite angry, like, how dare you talk to me like that? You don't know what I'm capable of. You don't know what I did when I was in the war, when I was dealing with all these injuries and these men. So that gave me that kind of perspective of being a woman and being talked down to by a man, which, would never happen to me otherwise. So that was an interesting experience. So all sorts of things come up.
Yeah, it's so fascinating. And I know that you're also interested in deathbed visions. And I would love, do you have some things you can share about deathbed visions?
Yeah, they're fascinating. I talked to Dr. Christopher Kerr, who's in charge of a hospice in America, and he had to go through all these checks to make sure what he was doing was ethical, and he did a study into deathbed visions and wrote a book about it. And so he's got videos as well on YouTube, I think, where he's interviewing the people who are having these experiences. And so they talk about how, people come to visit them in the last days of their life, and they say, oh, my father was here or my mother was here, they're going to come to collect me, and they say it's not quite time yet. And they say things like, can you make sure my bags are packed and make sure I've got my passport? And the nurses or the family may be in the room and they'll see them talking to someone who's not there. And the thing is, it's like they're seeing ghosts or something, which might be quite scary, but it's not at all for the people that are experiencing this. And I believe that hospice nurses see this a lot, and it doesn't seem to be talked about much outside of it. But I talked to Dr. Penny Sartori, who's a near-death experience researcher, but she was a nurse for 17 years, and she was first job was working in a hospice, and she came into the night shift, and they have a little meeting at the beginning of the shift to just explain what's going on in the hospital. And the person said, and the person in room 17 has started talking to people that aren't there, so we can assume they're going to pass on in the next couple of days. And Penny Sartori was like, oh, I get it, they're playing a prank on me. You know, it's the new girl, we'll play a prank on her. But she did go to that room, and that was exactly what was happening. This person was talking to somebody who wasn't there. And they say things like, one of the patients said that they were looking out of the room, the window, at all the children playing on the grass. But there's no grass outside the window, there's no children. And others say things like there's a hole above them with this light coming through. And the people say they see them reaching up, they're trying to get to this hole so they can go through it into the light. But it's a thing where the body's slowing down and getting closer to death. And Christopher Kerr said that they notice that the closer they get to death, the more frequent these experiences are, and that it can be so helpful for people who are dying to take away fear and what have you. And that if people start having these things, the doctors shouldn't treat them like hallucinations and think we better give them some more drugs because, you know, this isn't good. Because it seems that the more drugs the people have in them, the less they have the experiences. Because a skeptic might say, well, they're hallucinating because of the drugs, but they get more of it without the drugs. And it seems quite a mean thing to do, to give them morphine when they don't really need it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, it makes me think too about the role of cats in hospice. I'm sure you've come across this too, but where, nursing homes, for example, retirement, do you call them nursing homes in the UK?
Yeah.
Okay. Or hospice, they might have a resident cat, and that cat will, there are multiple stories of this. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Is it when the cat goes to visit?
Yeah, the cat will go and lay like with a particular patient, and there's something about how long they spend there or the behavior of the cat, but that also is like a predictor. So you talk about that meeting that the staff had where they were seeing the signs and they're like, yep, it's this patient is close. I know that there are other similar things where it's like, oh, the cat won't leave the room of, room 117. And so, all indicators suggest that they're in transition, which is just fascinating because I have found cats to be so perceptive. I have 2 cats, and one in particular I call my Galactic cat because she seems to be really tuned in to when I'm noticing like vibrations in my body or like heightened, heightened kind of energetic things, heightened psychic things. It's kind of like she will start, because a lot of times those things for me will happen like before I fall asleep, but kind of in that transition time, that hypnagogic state between wakefulness and sleep. And I will start feeling things within my body, vibrations, or I'll hear things, or and she'll come frequently when this is happening, and she'll like dig her open mouth at the top of my head and like root around the top of my head, or she'll lay on a certain part of me and it is the part that's vibrating. Like if my solar plexus is vibrating, she'll come and lay right there, or she'll just want to be nearby. And it's happened so many times that it's like, oh, this is like she is being very intentional with where she's placing herself. So it's just fascinating, these indicators that come, this again back to the mystery of this reality. It's just fascinating.
Yeah, and it's weird how we might be seeing a connection between UFOs and the afterlife and frequency and consciousness. And that's, like I said earlier, some really strange things come up during the abduction phenomenon, where it seems like people are taken, but their body's left behind, and it's their consciousness that's taken.
Yeah, that's how it's been for me. I wouldn't say that I have ever physically been taken or been aboard, a craft or anything, but I definitely have had experiences where I know I'm in my bed, but I also am like, it's as though I can also perceive that I'm somewhere else as well. And I can kind of see it a little bit. I might see like thin lines that are showing the shape of something, and I might feel presences, but I also am like, but wait, am I still in my room? I am. I'm in my room. I'm in my bed, so it's really interesting.
Do you ever have it when you close your eyes when you're going to sleep and then you see shapes and sort of things coming across? Because I've had that recently.
Absolutely.
And I was talking to this guy who's got a YouTube channel about alien encounters, and he said that he's had an increasing amount of people talking about that happening. So I don't know what that is.
Yes, that is how it happens for me, where I will close my eyes, I'll see like moving patterns, like I might see like for example, like a toroidal field, that is sort of like donut shaped. But often I see it from the side, so you can't even like see that there's a hole in the middle or anything, but in all this moving energy around it, but it looks like these moving shapes, moving patterns. And then sometimes I'll see more standalone geometries and things like that. But yeah, I know I do experience what you're talking about. So interesting.
Yeah.
Well, Simon, this has just been so fascinating. I love exploring these mysteries. I love what you're doing out in the world with your podcasts and your book. Tell people how they can connect with you and get your book and tune in to your podcasts.
Yeah, so the podcasts I've got are Paranormal, Afterlife, an alien UFO podcast, and they can be found on Apple and Spotify, all those kind of places. And my website is pastliveshypnosis.co.uk, and you can go on there and there's a booking page. You can go into my calendar and book a free 20-minute call where we could discuss past life regression and what you might want to achieve from it. And the book's called Verified Near-Death Experiences, and that's on Amazon, paperback, Kindle, audiobook, and you can get it other places as well.
Beautiful. And do you do those sessions online, or do people have to be near you?
It's all on Zoom. I have clients all over the world.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much. I've loved this discussion. I really appreciate you being here today, Simon.
Yeah, it's been great. Nice to talk to you again.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for listening to this episode of Soul Elevation. Please take a moment to think about someone in your life who might be uplifted or have their curiosity sparked by this content, and send it on to them. Let's keep sharing high-frequency, empowering content to reinforce the highest potential for humanity. I also invite you to subscribe to this content. Thank you for your support, and I'll see you for the next episode of Soul Elevation.